Welcome back to Slick Talk. I am your host, Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to episode 71, Mixed Signals. Sometimes car care and vehicle maintenance can be a little bit like a whodunit. You know those stories where something is wrong, a crime is committed, there's a list of suspects, a detective will work through them one by one, ruling out the possible explanations before finally picking the culprit. Well, sometimes that happens for engines too, especially those that suddenly have a case of low oil pressure. Some owners will fear a problem with the bearings and tear right into the engine. But if you're an owner and you have low oil pressure but no corresponding signs of a bearing problem, you know, the usual suspects like a knocking sound coming from the engine, then maybe you want to consider a used oil sample to find out if that low oil pressure is wear related or not. Later in this episode, I'm going to break down a specific instance where an owner, noticing their engine had low oil pressure, decided to send in a sample and find out what was really going on. Before I jump into that story, I do want to give a couple of shout outs. First off to Oliver, owner of the 89 F-150. I was in the office today, and one of the writers on staff sent me a message to let me know that you left a kind note about Slick Talk on the slip. First of all, thank you so much for filling out the slip. We love you for that, but also thank you for being a listener of Slick Talk. Your support means the world. Congratulations on a clean report for that F-150. That engine's running strong at 92,944 miles. Keep up the good work. Next up, I recently heard from Matt, aka Garage Engineer on Instagram. We had Matt on the show. He was a phenomenal guest. Loved talking to him. He sent in another sample from his third gen Camaro. He was able to address a coolant leak. It was a blown gasket. That engine looks to be well on its way to a complete recovery. Congratulations to Matt. Good work with the Camaro. We love seeing the progress, and thanks so much for sending in another sample so that way we could see how that engine's narrative is progressing. There's clear improvement in the levels of coolant. Metals are looking better too, and used oil analysis was able to not only find the problem but track the progress thanks to an effective maintenance plan. And one more appetizer before I bring out the entree for this episode. I did end up taking that trip to Louisville that I talked about on the last episode of Slick Talk. I checked out a few distilleries, and while we don't have any official sponsors on this show, you know, it's all Blackstone. If we could ever sway Angel's Envy, I might look at that pretty strongly. As far as the actual product, that was definitely my favorite. But the one singular experience of the trip that will definitely stick with me was actually a speakeasy experience that they have over at Evan Williams, where they replicate the Prohibition era. And I won't really go any further than that because if you have an opportunity to do this, you don't want many more details than that. But just know that they put on a heck of a show. It is a fantastic, one-of-a-kind experience compared to everything else I saw while I was in Louisville. You know, we checked out Rabbit Hole, which was a fairly new distillery, Michter's, which also isn't terribly old in terms of the recent ownership. But still, what they were able to pull off at Evan Williams, that was something special. And I went in thinking, I'll check it out. But Evan's nowhere near my favorite bourbon. Still, it ended up being a fantastic experience, and I highly recommend it if you're ever in Louisville. Loyal listeners will also remember that I made this trip with next to no oil life left per my dashboard, but I did take that sample before I made the drive, and it looked just fine in my opinion. I've looked at thousands upon thousands of oil samples. I was actually trying to come up with a rough estimate, and the total number kind of scares me. I'm going to stay away from quantifying it right now. But I've looked at many a sample, especially from young engines, and I saw an oil that really looked pretty good, and results that were akin to lingering wear-in and sealer, nothing that looked concerning. So despite a low OLM reading at the time of the trip, I braved it, made it back to Fort Wayne from Louisville. The Blazer is intact. I look forward to updating you all on how it progresses as that wear-in and sealer washes out. We'll see what I end up doing for an oil change interval. But I'm glad to say that the trip to Louisville there and back was smooth. The Blazer handled it like a champ. And now it's time for the main event. Recently, a sample came across our desk, this one from a Kubota V2203 diesel engine. The owner was concerned because, as I mentioned earlier in the show, this engine had low oil pressure, and they didn't know why. Now, in the absence of used oil analysis, you might be left to your own devices to tear into the engine and find out if there's a problem with the bearings, a costly measure to be sure. Even if you're capable of doing it on your own, the time spent is valuable. And what's more, you might not even need to open the engine to find out what's going on. This was a case where, fortunately, used oil analysis prevented not only expensive looking around, but also was able to direct the owner to the actual issue. This time it was a problem with the sending unit. If you have a problem with the sending unit, then low oil pressure can suddenly pop up. But when it's not due to a problem with the bearings, you can dodge the issue of opening the engine entirely. So let's talk about how we can determine whether or not it is indeed a problem with the bearings. All you'll need to do is retrieve a sample of engine oil either by sampling the drain, or you can take a sample from the dipstick. Once you send it our way in one of our free test kits that you can retrieve off our website, blackstone-labs.com, you can then take your sample and send it back our way. The nice thing about our kits, longtime listeners will know this by now, but if you're new here, they come with free prepaid postage. So that way you can send the sample right back to us, and then we can analyze it. Then finally, you'll only pay for the analysis. The kit itself, the postage is free, offered by us. Once the kit comes across our desk and we unpack it, we set it up for testing, then we look at the results, we can break down the spectral analysis, which is of particular importance if you're worried about a problem with the bearings. Depending on the bearings you have, poor bearing wear could show up as high lead or high aluminum. It's easy to tell if you have aluminum bearings because there will be an absence of lead. In an engine, in terms of wearing parts, the only likely source of lead is going to be bearing wear. For that reason, if you're an owner who owns something that runs any sort of product that could contribute lead, be sure to let us know. That way we can factor in whether or not there's an additive or a fuel type that could be contributing lead. In this case, it was a Kubota diesel. We didn't expect any sort of additive that could be inflating the lead level. Instead, we could take that metal for what it was, a sign of bearing wear. Now, if you have some metal, that's okay. Some owners will send in samples and think that the presence of any metal is a concern, and that's not the case. Every engine is going to make metal, at least of the microscopic variety. You never want to see visible chunks of metal, whiskers and shavings and the like. But the microscopic metals are going to be there whether your engine is in good shape or not. So what we want to do is compare those to our averages. These are specific to the engine types. That way you have a direct comparison to other engines of that type. We were able to compare this owner's metals to our averages and find that bearing wear looked just fine. So he was able to rule out the suspect of a bearing problem causing low oil pressure. And along the way, we're able to look at how the oil held up. That, of course, is going to be evident in the viscosity. Look at how effective oil filtration was based on the insolubles level, and then give a walkthrough of contaminants, the usual suspects like fuel, coolant, excess dirt, and of course, look at metals beyond lead. This is all contained in our standard analysis, so don't let the name seem to indicate that you are not getting a full overview of the engine. This owner has the benefit of not only learning how the bearings are getting along, but how the cylinder area looks. Is copper from brass and bronze parts like bushings in the valve train? Where does that stand? And of course, walking you through the physical properties, so if you do find a concern that maybe hasn't registered on your end yet, You can address it while you're addressing things like, in this owner's case, the sending unit. Now, if all of these results seem like a lot to unpack, especially if you're a novice, don't worry. There's an analyst behind the keys who is crafting a comment that you can understand. And what's more, if you have any questions beyond the comment that we include on the report, you can always give us a call or email and speak directly to the analyst, the one who's familiar with the data, who understood the results, crafted the comment, and then walk you through any additional questions that you may have. On my end, questions that go beyond the comment usually relate to elements like oil additives, calcium, magnesium. Customers will want to know why those don't match up with averages, why we didn't bring it up, and fair point. There's a lot of elements to consider in the spectral analysis, which is why we point out what matters, usually with highlights. If a metal is high, it looks concerning, or if we see a marker for contamination, we're going to point that out too. You can rest on highlights in the comment to guide you through what you need to know. But of course, learning more is never a bad thing. Understanding the variety of sources for certain elements is always good education. That way, you know whether or not to be concerned, and also you aren't left to wonder if what you read in a forum is correct or if what you saw in a YouTube video is right. You can rest assured that the analysis will speak to what may or may not be a concern, because if there's something unusual in the oil, there's a reason for it, and we'll help you unpack whether that problem you're having on your end seems to be wear related. Is it related to contamination? Another problem with the physical properties? We'll sift through all of those results for you and let you know. And with any luck, all you'll need is a standard analysis to understand what's going on in your engine. Better that than the unknown costs that often arise from opening an engine up, only to learn you might never have needed to do it in the first place. That wraps up our main event for today's show. Thank you so much for listening and sticking with us through 71 episodes. We have some new and exciting video content on the way that we are crafting just before I recorded this show. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Blackstone Laboratories. We also post content on our Instagram on a regular basis. Not only will you be a better equipped armchair analyst, if you will, you'll be watching production that is homegrown, never stock footage, passion projects that include the work of myself, my co-producer Josh, that we are immensely proud of. So if you haven't yet, cruise over to our YouTube channel, our Instagram. We're also on TikTok, Twitter. It's exhausting, I know. We have all the social media channels we can, rocking and rolling, and we'll continue to do so. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.